So this is the book. It's called New Contributions to the History of the Ukrainian Language, and is a collection of some articles that are all devoted to that very topic, the history of the Ukrainian language, which means that this is the Ukrainian language from its beginnings up to the present. Various topics, including questions of social linguistics, historical grammar, or the question which grammars were written, for whom, or questions such as what was the language practiced in the environment of Hetman Mazepa, up to the language policy under the presidency of Viktor Yanukovych, or let's say the essence of the so-called Ukrainization, this and that, philology that is devoted to my major hero, the hero of my scholarly research, that is the Ukrainian language and its history. Maybe I should add how come that this book was published. It is the result of some considerations that are connected to the 150th anniversary of the so-called Value Circular, or Value Directive of 1863. As a reminder, this document stated that the language that we are talking about, the Ukrainian language, is a language that did not exist, does not exist, and cannot exist. And this book is one of my efforts that are devoted to the proof that Ukrainian is a language with a history, with a present, and a future. In this case, we decided that it would be good to organize a collection of my articles in English. But in a sense, this book is a continuation of previous publication, which is my Ukrainophone book. I prepared it, which is called Причинки до історії української мови. Other essays, and this book that was published in Ukrainian was a major success at its time. So we published it in 2008, and it witnessed 3 editions, which is a very rare phenomenon in linguistics in general, and in Ukrainian linguistics in particular. So the success story of those first contributions made this idea to prepare some new contributions even more attractive. Yes, this introduction is kind of programmatic. It reacts to the most widely spread anti-Ukrainian myths and prejudices. For instance, it sheds some light on the question what the language of Kievan Rus really was. It discusses the question of whether Ukrainian descends from Russian or not, whether Ukrainian is really just the Russian language spoiled by the influence of Polish, as again stated in the Value Directive, and it discusses a variety of other anti-Ukrainian myths, such as the question whether Ukrainian is really such an artificial language, as was again not only stated in the Valuev Circular, because what we haven't mentioned so far is the fact that all those statements of the Valuev Circular that are in fact so ridiculous, they are unfortunately widespread to date. So it makes sense to collect such statements and to review them, which is what I in fact did in this first article. And my answer is, of course, that Ukrainian does have an exciting history, and that the language of Kievan Rus was definitely not Russian, and that the languages of Kievan Rus were quite diverse, but that, of course, the language history of Kievan Rus is an integral part of the history of the Ukrainian language. Moreover, and that is in fact a different question, I think I could again demonstrate that Ukraine is not really a descendant of Russian, but that in fact not only our work within the field of Ukrainian studies, but also the most serious work done by Russian scholars, in fact, provides us with only one convincing picture, that Ukrainian, just like Russian or Belarusian too, they all descend from Proto-Slavic and not from one another. This is a scholarly response to some scholarly prejudices, so to speak, and to some prejudices that are widespread even beyond scholarship, and also in spheres that are maybe scholarly but not linguistic. I would like to try to make this point. Why? Because language is, of course, something that is of great concern to us all. It is of immense importance in many ways. In fact, all the humanities are in a very essential way to language as such. That is why, in fact, everyone thinks that he or she can say something about language, and that is perfectly true. But the question is what we can say about language as non-scholars, as non-specialists, and we can again say a lot about it and think a lot about it, but language is an immense field of research for scholars in many ways, and scholarship does require some expertise, and of course without certain expertise we cannot say a lot of serious things about the history of a language. We often encounter people, we are not only sitting in a golden cage of scholarship. We also encounter different people out on the streets of our world, and the statement that Ukrainian is an artificial language, that it is a very recently invented language, and this and that, these statements are quite widespread, and not only among people who have a hostile attitude toward the Ukrainian language, but also among people who just don't know anything about the Ukrainian language. This is maybe one further motivation for publishing this book, the fact that the Ukrainian language is not really a small language. It is spoken by decades of millions of speakers and belongs to the more widespread languages of this world. But it is a language that many people know very little about. This also stems from the fact that Ukrainian linguistics is usually made in Ukrainian within a circle of Ukrainian speakers, and of course I am, so to speak, guilty myself, because I publish my own studies in Ukrainian too, to an increasing degree. But in Ukrainian studies and in Ukrainian linguistics in particular too, we of course have to pay some attention to the fact that it is quite important that not only speakers of Ukrainian see us, hear us, but we should be open for a wider public. And of course, an English language publication can make a certain contribution to this end. As we all know, Ukrainian is a Slavic language, and as such, it descends, as we have already mentioned, from a language that is called Proto-Slavic. This language, Proto-Slavic, is a language that is not really a language that is testified in written documents, but we have to reconstruct it. Still, a variety of various pieces of evidence makes us more or less agree, most scholars agree, that this Proto-Slavic language existed up to about 600 after Christ. And all Slavic languages in some way are based on this Proto-Slavic language. This Proto-Slavic language split into various dialects that were not really Ukrainian or Croatian or Polish from the outset, but they were just Slavic dialects. Within a Slavophone area that covered a very large territory of Central Eastern and Eastern Europe at that time. Various dialects that were later developed into languages, so to speak. And this Proto-Slavic language, after it split up, was still so homogeneous, relatively homogeneous, that we call the period up to the second millennium Common Slavic. Within that Common Slavic period, however, those dialects, they became more and more characteristic and more particular with regard to, or in comparison to, other dialects. And these dialects were unified into languages only in the course of time. These dialects, they went through certain developments, internal developments and developments that were caused by language contexts. And again, these dialects as such are above all linguistic varieties that we have to reconstruct to a very high degree, because as such, as spoken varieties, they are not testified in written documents. And written languages that evolved in the course of time, they were always to a larger or a smaller degree different from the varieties that were actually spoken by the Slavs, for instance, right? Then we have this period that we call the Old Ukrainian period. It lasts more or less from the beginning of the second millennium up to the 14th, 15th centuries. This is a period when we already do have some written documents. It is a period of writing, and the mirror that is offered in these written sources, the mirror of the language that was generally spoken by the people, gives us a picture that demonstrates very clearly that the language of the territory of modern Ukraine was quite different from the language of, let's say, Novgorod in medieval Kievan Rus, but the Russian part of it, so to speak. And then within the period from about the end of the 15th, 16th centuries, new stage set in that we call the Middle Ukrainian period, with a lot of innovations that include the emergence of printing in the 16th century, and new ideas that also reached Ukraine, such as the idea of Protestantism and this and that, a very interesting and lively period of the history of Ukraine and the history of the Ukrainian language too. And this middle Ukrainian period lasts more or less until the end of the 18th century. And at that point, the new Ukrainian period, as we can call it, began, which in fact extends to date. This is one possible model of the periodization of the Ukrainian language, although of course we know that any periodization is to a large degree arbitrary. This is one that I am quite fine with. I find the arguments quite convincing, so to speak. And for instance, I would not deny that within that common Slavic period, so even up to the second millennium, we can already talk about Proto-Ukrainian dialects, as for instance, the master of Ukrainian linguistics, George Shevelyov, used to proceed. Now, we could talk about the standardization in particular, but I think that I should just answer for your next question. That would be the better idea. Ukrainian grammars is, in fact, a quite ambivalent wording, and that is good. That is perfect, because on the one hand, these Ukrainian grammars can be grammars of Ukrainian, and on the other hand, these grammars can be grammars that emerged in Ukraine. If we take a look at grammars of Slavic languages as such, the first languages, the first grammars that offer us grammatical description of Slavic languages in a more or less modern sense, they emerge in the 16th century. And now we can ask the question, when did the first grammars appear in Ukraine? Precisely in the 16th century. So the Ukrainians were among the first. And they were leading, especially if we think about the world of Slavic orthodoxy, the so-called Slavia Orthodoxa, or Orthodoxa, because the Orthodox world was a little bit behind as for many developments that were rather typical of the European West. But the Ukrainians were not. Why? Because they were then part of the so-called Rzeczpospolita. They were part of the republic that was composed of the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, and they constituted a large part of the population of that major power of early modern Europe. In that framework, Ukrainians were exposed to influences that spread from the west to the east, and they adopted a lot of those elements at quite an early stage, and they became intellectual leaders of the Orthodox world in the 16th century. Writing grammars was part of this game, of this intellectual progress, in other words. But in many cases, people would not really write grammars of their own vernaculars in order to teach other people that vernacular. That was not the usual approach. Grammars were rather written in order to offer rules that could make people understand the system of languages that were nobody's mother tongue anymore. Or these grammars were written in order to describe the rules of a certain language to non-native speakers of that language, in order to convey some knowledge to learned mean of that time, right? And in Ukraine, the first grammars were not really devoted to the description of Ukrainian, but to the language of the church, the language of some spheres of communication in setting of higher education, but above all, one of the traditional languages that were so important for Ukrainians, and that was Church Slavonic. And Lavrenti Zizani's work, his grammar of the Church Slavonic language, was a major achievement as for the grammatical description of the Church Slavonic language. He was a predecessor of Miletis Motoretsky, who in 1619 published his grammar of the Church Slavonic language in Yevye, which is a village in the surroundings of Vilnius. And this Miletis Motoretsky, another Ukrainian, together with the publication of the Bible of Ostrich in 1581, marked the beginning of a completely new era in the history of the Church Slavonic language. This was the beginning of modern Church Slavonic, so to speak. And in that sense, too, this early modern period is of tremendous importance for the culture and linguistic history, not only of Ukrainians, but of all Slavdom, so to speak. During that period of time, many people would think, we are talking about intellectual centers now, right? The first moment they would think of Kyiv and the Mohyla Academy, which is a very important intellectual center, again, not only of Ukraine, but of the entire world of Slavic orthodoxy in the 17th century. But we should never forget that all these, again, anti-Ukrainian statements about this great divide between Ukraine, it does not really apply even to those years, because where did most learned mean that gathered at the Mohyla Academy come from? From the West, right? So there was a movement from Lviv, for instance, to Kyiv. Even the print shop was moved from Western Ukraine to Kyiv. And then not everything was centered in Ukraine as such, but in that state, in the Rzeczpospolita, Belarusians were still a very important part of that cultural and linguistic history that can be called Ruthenian in a broader sense. That is why, for instance, Vilnius comes in, right? And Belarusians and Ukrainians, in fact, had language of culture, or at least two languages of culture, that were more or less identical, precisely for those two peoples that at that time probably were not separate peoples or nations in the modern understanding. And that is why Smotretsky, for instance, could work in Vilnius and meet some Belarusians there, but he probably had the impression that those Belarusians just spoke quite odd version of his own language. In the sphere of writing, those differences would usually disappear, because writing is usually not an immediate reflection of spoken languages. Never ever. At that time, even less so. So Belarusians and Ukrainians, they wrote in Church Slavonic, and that was a language that opened doors to the very wide world of Slavic Orthodoxy as such. And once again, they were, in fact, extremely influential at that time, above all, Ukrainians. And then they also had a language of secular culture that was called Ruthenian, in Ukrainian, Ruski Yazyk, but this language had nothing in common with Russian, and that is something that makes things quite complicated because the terminology is a topic in itself to a very high degree. At that time, of course, Kharkiv or Donetsk or Odessa are not yet part of the game, if we talk about the real East, so to speak. But the West and the East were always together. This is not only something that we can notice regarding intellectual centers, but think about Cossacks. Where did they come from? They didn't come from nowhere, but think about Konashevich Sahaydachny. Where did he come from? He was a Galician guy. So that was something that happened all the time, so to speak, movement within the territories of modern Ukraine, and at that time very often to the steppe, right, first in central Ukraine, and then afterwards, you know the story, to Sloboda Ukraine, and this and that. This is something that interested me too, to a very high degree, when I just had the opportunity to prepare a presentation for a conference that was organized a few years ago at Harvard University. It was organized to celebrate the anniversary of the Battle of Poltava, and this happened in a setting that I appreciate very much. So this conference gathered, of course, not primarily linguists, but I was one of the linguists. It also gathered historians and scholars from other disciplines. And at that point, I decided to examine what we know about Mazepa's language and the language of his chancery. Up to that point, I knew something about earlier documents and about later documents. I knew something about the gradual Russification of the Ukrainian chancery language in the 18th century. I knew quite something about the chancery language that was used within the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania before. But up to that point, I had not really examined what the situation was during that period in between. So that was something that fascinated me too. And so I tried to find out what we can say with regard to this question that is of certain interest to all, because Mazepa as a person is of some interest to us all too, right? First, what we know about Mazeppa is that he was a true polyglot. He knew quite a lot of languages, not just Ukrainian, which was, of course, his mother tongue. Second, we know Mazeppa as a poet, but I did not really pay my attention to this field. I was more interested in Mazeppa as a statesman, so to speak, and as in Mazeppa as the hetman who fulfilled his duty in a certain political context, and in a certain political context that, of course, had to imply at least some rules of conduct with regard to language. And the setting was such that, of course, there was an encounter between Russians and Ukrainians at that time. And what we see is that Mazeppa's chancery is still not very open to influences from the Russian sphere, except for some formulae which were necessary for diplomatic reasons. But in Mazeppa's chancery, the Ukrainian chancery language is still intact to a very high degree. This chancery language, again, is of course not an immediate mirror of the language that was spoken at the time, or the language that was spoken by Mazeppa himself. But it was a harmonic continuation of traditions that had been alive for centuries at that time. It is a language that still offers us a picture that is very different from the chancery language of the period when this Russification really set in, gradually beginning in the 1720s. What can we say about Ivan Mazeppa's spoken language? I think we can, above all, make some more or less convincing assumptions. And one assumption would be that his spoken language was, in fact, a very colorful language, and in fact not one language, but since he was a polyglot, a variety of languages that he really spoke. And if we try to think just about his Ukrainian language, I'm pretty sure that his Ukrainian language was very heterogeneous too, depending to a very high degree on the question to whom he spoke, whether to a peasant or to a simple Cossack, or to a former colleague of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, and this and that. And what I also think, it seems to be quite clear based on at least the documents that I saw, is the fact that Mazeppa barely knew Russian. He knew Polish very well, there's no doubt about that, but he barely knew Russian. As for Khmelnytsky, the situation is pretty much the same, I guess. I have not carefully studied the language of the documents of his chancery so far. Would be a good idea for a next article, by the way. Thank you for this question, so to speak. But as for his personal languages, once again, he knew quite a variety of languages. Just like Mazeppa, I forgot that. He knew Latin too, beyond doubt. He knew Polish too, and he certainly did not know Russian. So this is what we still see up to the end of Peter I's reign, so to speak, that the official language in the Ukrainian-speaking areas was still quite intact within the confines of the Russian Empire. The situation had changed a little bit earlier in the territories that remained part of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, because the very successful story of Ruthenian as an official language ended there in 1696, so on the eve of the 18th century. And this was the period of a certain decline in very many ways, so to speak. However, people continued to speak Ukrainian. Only some of them ceased to do so. One of the catastrophes at that time was the fact that especially in the spheres of the high society of those days, many in fact switched to the dominating languages in certain political contexts. We know that such shifts occurred in the direction of Polish very often since the second half of the 16th centuries, and that's those elites of those days. We know that in the course of the 18th century, this switch began to occur quite often within the confines of the Russian Empire. Right? Still, many people, the large majority of the population, were not so impressed by those developments, that did not really have a huge impact on them, and the history of the Ukrainian language as spoken by the commoners was something that proceeded for centuries without any major ruptures. Again, it's just internal developments and some developments that are influenced by some contacts with neighboring languages and this and that. But this is in fact a very harmonic process because those internal developments and externally motivated developments is something that is, of course, not unique to Ukrainian. This can be said about any language that we can think about. However, there is this other factor that always comes into play and that we have to take into consideration when we talk about the history of a language. The history of a language is not just the history of some isolated forms, sounds, words, sentences, and so on and so forth. The history of languages is always something that is to a very high degree linked to cultural history and to questions that belong into the sphere of historical sociolinguistics, as we can call it. So why was written Ukrainian so close to the true vernacular, not so much in earlier times, but beginning from the late 18th century and in the course of the 19th century? This was very important goal for many people, because this is something that is linked to the spirit of the time, sentimentalism first, and then above all the Romantic period, right? So it's also something that is linked to the idea of a nation, and the idea of a nation that encompasses not only the elites of a certain group, but also the commoners. And the commoner, so to speak, became a true hero in the Romantic period. And that is also reflected in the history of the Ukrainian language, and not only. In the Romantic period, not only Ukrainian, but a lot of languages, including Slavic languages, were standardized in the modern sense, and they were usually standardized based on the conviction that standard languages, modern standard languages, should be very close to the vernaculars. And that is what happened in Ukraine too. Well, in fact, by the way, Zizani was one of the first authors of dictionaries too. So, of course, those are related spheres. And his dictionary, his Lexis, as it is called, was very influential again in the entire Orthodox world. So that's the end of the 16th century. And here we see, above all, the attempt to explain Church Slavonic words that were not immediately understandable to many. And then in the 17th century, Pamva Berinda continued that work. Some other dictionaries emerged, not all not all of them are just important with regard to the Church Slavonic language, let's put it like that. We have, for instance, a dictionary that stems from the 17th century that was part of this different story to explain some language that was spoken in the world to other people, but we should not dwell upon that too long. Let's rather think about modern dictionaries of the modern Ukrainian language, and let's confine ourselves to the area of the Russian Empire first. What we see at the end of the 18th century, what we see as soon as, say, Ivan Kotelevsky's Eneida is printed, you would immediately find in those Ukrainian language publications lists of words with explanations of Ukrainian words that were not understandable to an average reader. Those are the beginnings of modern dictionaries, so to speak. Also, the first grammar that was published in the Russian Empire, the first grammar of modern Ukrainian, Alexander Pavlovsky's grammar of the Little Russian dialect, Грамматика малороссийского наречия, with a Russian title, explains some rules of something that he regarded as a dialect at that time, and also offers a quite elementary dictionary, so to speak. But precisely the sphere of dictionaries is something that is quite a complicated process during the entire 19th century. There are some isolated authors that make some very valuable contributions. They compose word lists and even dictionaries, but unfortunately they are not printed well into the second half of the 19th century, when those first dictionaries that really came out in print, they were published thanks to the initiatives of the so-called Romade, that is the organizations, clubs of Ukrainian national activists that were quite active at that time, and still they could not really publish their work in the Russian Empire, but they had to do it in Galicia, thanks to the Valuev Circular once again. Now, when the Valuev Circular and the Ems Ukaz, that ban of 1876 that made things even worse for Ukrainian, were lifted, one of the first results was the publication of that great dictionary that was composed by Boris Hrenchenko. Hrenchenko, who elaborated a dictionary that is of great importance even to date, right? And this story is quite typical of Russian-ruled Ukraine, and in some contexts we always have to tell at least two stories of the Ukrainian language that are, however, not two separate stories. So we have to think about Austrian-ruled Galicia too, and the political framework of the development of the Ukrainian language was really extremely different from that of the Russian Empire. We do have some handwritten dictionaries from Galicia from the first half of the 19th century, even such a dictionary that is preserved in Lviv. But this is a long story that I cannot tell in a quite complete way here, but just let me give you one example that is maybe striking. The first terminological dictionary of the Ukrainian language, history of law terminology and of political terminology was published. It was not just written, it was published, and it was even initiated by the Austrian state. I'm not telling you the story as an Austrian or as an Austrian patriot, but as a historian of the Ukrainian language, was published in 1851. Thanks to the fact that Ukrainian became a language, an official language of the Austrian Empire, that had equal rights to all other languages of the empire, at least for some period of time. And then, even after that short period of time, a great variety of rights that are far from what we could even imagine in the Russian Empire. That is linked to a certain setting that is the sphere of the study of language policy. So since Ukrainian was used, for instance, in Austrian laws, and those laws that were published in Ukrainian had the same legal power as laws that were published in German, beginning in 1848, 1849, such a dictionary was necessary and useful, and it was published within that framework. And that could not happen in the Russian Empire, where most achievements that were made until 1850 were made in the sphere of fine literature. Barely anything apart from that. And as we said before, even Pavlovsky's grammar was not really meant to be a contribution to the codification, the standardization of a language, but rather the description of some linguistic variety that he at that point called the Little Russian dialect. So in Galicia, this whole process was completely different from that of the Russian Empire. But just in order to give you one more example of reaction to anti-Ukrainian myths, many people with a hostile attitude toward Ukrainians, the Ukrainian language, and their history would also say that in the 19th century there were Ruthenians on the one hand and Little Russians on the other hand, and they were so separate that they were even to separate peoples with separate languages. And this is, of course, far from the truth, because even those names are, of course, the result of a certain history. And the name Little Russians was, in fact, an artificial name that was introduced only in the Russian imperial setting. And those names were more or less widely used in the 19th century, but we have to think about the essence of it, that is, its meaning, and not about the surface, the sound structure of the name. And in order to assess that in a convincing way, we have to know what people thought about those names and about their meanings. And we can come to conclusions only if we are ready to study the sources. And the sources tell us a very clear story that, some part of that nation, the Ukrainian nation, was called Ruthenians. Some other part of that nation was called Little Russians, or sometimes Southern Russians, or whatever. But everybody knew in the course of the 19th century as well that this was one nation with one language, and everybody was convinced of that. Even people who questioned the existence of the Ukrainian nation as such, let's put it like that, never denied that Ruthenians and Little Russians were the same people. We are in fact again talking about one element of this anti-Ukrainian narrative that is so contradictory in many ways. We often hear something like Ukrainian was invented by the Poles, it was invented by the Austrians, it was invented by the Germans. On the Polish side, we can sometimes hear that Ukrainian was invented by the Russians. In some situations, I already said that I'm ready to take the whole blame on me. I invented the Ukrainian language. What can be, this is not yet a question, an answer to your question, what can be something interesting behind the statement that Ukrainian is artificial, not invented by anyone, but regarding the statement that Ukrainian is artificial. We've been talking for quite a while now about various varieties, right? And we have also been talking about the difference between written and spoken varieties. And we have already mentioned the fact that written varieties always reflect spoken language only to a certain degree. In that understanding, written languages and also spoken varieties of written languages, let me put it like that, are always to some degree artificial. And that's about written languages as such. But if we think about modern standard languages as such, languages that are meant to cover a huge territory, as for the larger languages, and Ukrainian is one of them, a huge territory that is inhabited by people with various dialects. If we are talking about a standard language that should be developed into such a language that we can talk about any topic in that language, apart from the fact that, of course, few Ukrainian peasants in the 19th century discussed questions of theology or physics in their villages, right? And therefore, Ukrainian did not have such a terminology in the 19th century that was Ukrainian by origin. If we think about that, then of course the Ukrainian standard language is an artificial language to a very high degree. But what do you think? Does this apply only to the Ukrainian language? Or could it be that this applies to any standard language, including such languages as German, English, or even Russian? Let me add one sentence that is not meant to be a provocation. It should not be a provocation. But Russian is one of the most artificial languages that I know. Right? One of the most artificial languages that I know, because it has an intriguing history. It is a wonderful language too if it's spoken by wonderful people, and there are lots of them, but it is one of the most artificial languages that I know, and precisely within the framework of Slavic languages as such. Now, what was the question? The question was the period of Ukrainization. In fact, one of those anti-Ukrainian myths says that Ukrainian became more or less codified standard language only during the period of Ukrainization and only thanks to the Bolsheviks. This is something that we also hear quite often, and it tries to make a very big issue of the 1920s and 30s, if we sometimes, as we sometimes hear, and the general myth says that in the 1920s and in the 1930s, the Bolsheviks supported the development of the Ukrainian language to such a degree that Ukrainian could develop so powerfully, mainly thanks to the Soviets. I cannot claim that it is only me who knows that this is, of course, not true. But I took the opportunity when we worked on that book to take a closer look at this whole story from my own perspective. And what are we really talking about if we talk about the period of Ukrainization? We are talking about some steps that were taken by the Bolshevik regime beginning in 1923 on the level of propaganda and beginning in 1925 on the level of genuine political action. It was Stalin in 1923 who said that it is very important for the Bolsheviks to convey the political message and their propaganda to the various nationalities of the Soviet Union in their national languages, and that it was important to attract representatives of those nationalities and to attract them to the organs of Bolshevik political power. And that was a process that was, of course, not limited to the Ukrainian sphere. It was originally called the process of nationalization, later on indigenization, and in Ukraine this was, of course, above all the process of Ukrainization that was, as I already mentioned, something that truly began functioning only in 1925 or so. More than that, Stalin in 1923 frankly said from the outset that this was just a halt in the revolutionary movement, as he calls it, and he linked it to the so-called New Economic Policy, NEP, which was also meant to be a very temporary process from the outset. What did this mean, this temporary character of Ukrainization? Once it really began working in 1925, the secret police controlled all the leading protagonists of that process from the very outset, and as soon as 1929, the most important people that made their contribution to this development that we call Ukrainization, such as the most important members of the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences were accused of being part of a secret anti-Bolshevik society called SVU, Spilka Vyzvolenia Ukrainy, and only after 4 years, so to speak, this Ukrainization was in fact beheaded to a very high degree, right? And a great Ukrainian writer, Mykola Kulish, had it very convincingly in his play Nina Mazaylo, right, where one of his protagonists says, "What do they want to do, the Bolsheviks? Why are they conducting this policy of Ukrainization?" And one of those protagonists says that this is just in order to see whom they can kill later. And this was a kind of prophecy, so to speak. Beginning in 1929, Ukrainization was beheaded, and in 1933, it was in fact already ended. So we are talking about a couple of years, and nobody can tell me that full-fledged standard language can be coined and created within 4 or maybe 7 or 8 years. That's another myth. Regardless of the fact that, of course, this period of Ukrainization in this typically Soviet context of lies. This period is a very exciting period for us Ukrainians too, and that is what I got convinced in again when I wrote this article for this book. Once again, if you take a look at the history of the Ukrainian language in a broader sense, then you can come to the conclusion, and I came to that conclusion not so long ago, that in fact, of course, we can always mourn that this or that has not yet been achieved regarding the status, the development of the Ukrainian language in many respects. We can say that a lot more could have been done, might be done, but in general, it is on the contrary really impressive how much Ukrainians achieved during those windows when they could use those windows of opportunity that were opened usually for a very brief period of time. That is maybe one of my personal most important conclusions that I ended up with having worked on this book.